I'm streaming. Oh yeah, let me switch back. There we go. There's my intro screen. It's a little dark in here. Let me turn this one on. Yeah, it's not super important, but it's nice to be a little less shadowy, I guess. Oh, it's a bright sunny day. I want to go outside. Yeah, it's obviously not practical to do this class outside, but it would be kind of nice. Okay, so I'm going to get started pretty soon. I've got a lot to cover today, so I want to make sure to get to it without going too long. But, you know, as usual, if you're watching, let me know how things sound. If you have, or look, I mean, if you have any issues with sound or audio, just let me know. You can, of course, leave me a message in the Twitch chat or in Slack. And also, whichever you're in, either Twitch or Slack, if you could just say hi, that would be nice. It's always kind of nice to know who's out there watching, and that I'm not just talking to myself. I mean, I see the numbers on the stream. It's up to 7. It's great. But you know, it's cool to see who you actually are. So you can just say hi in the live stream chat channel in Slack if you feel like it, or the Twitch chat, whichever, you know, just to say hi. Oh, hi. Hi, Jessica. Thanks. So great. So hello. Yeah. Hello, Becca. Good to see you. Okay. I mean, that sort of personal connection, of course, is the big challenge with online classes anyway. So it's great to have at least that little minimal interaction there. That's good. Yeah. Yeah. So this is week 4. And we've got a lot of work to do. Oh, great. Yeah. Elizabeth and Summer saying hi too. We've got a lot of work to do this week. This is the last big push, and then week 5 is next week, obviously, and that's kind of wrapping things up and looking back on what we've done and iterating a little bit. In other words, taking some things that you've already done and then doing a little bit more with them. So really, this is the last week of a lot of new stuff, and it can be a challenge. So this week it's really one project with 2 massive components. So you know, in terms of the work you do, you might compartmentalize those a little bit. You might want to think about them as 2 projects, but the way I've described it is as one project with 2 components to it. So I'm just going to get right into it and work on introducing that to you today, and kind of see if you have any questions. I'm a little behind on grading and feedback. I had a busy weekend, so but I will be getting to those and taking a look at your object lesson projects. And if there's anything still undetermined or unrevised about your web literacy articles, I'm going to be taking a look at those again this week. So remember, with those, once you've completed your revisions, make sure you let me know that you consider them done. I've heard from a few groups, but not everyone yet. So please take another look at those if you haven't yet, and let's get those polished up so we can share them. I don't know if any of you are taking the COVID in Context class, by the way. That's the free summer course that UMW is doing, but I'm going to be leading a discussion in that class today. I'm not the main speaker, but my colleagues Anand Rao and Elizabeth Johnson-Young are going to be talking about communication and public health communication in a public health context. And so one of the things they're going to be talking about is misinformation and disinformation. And obviously that's something that we've been learning a bit about. So I'm going to be leading one of the breakout groups and talking about that, I guess, at 5 o'clock today on a Zoom meeting. So if you're in that class, then I'll see you there. If not, you know, you already know some things about disinformation and COVID-19. So great. Okay, so digital methodologies is the third, I guess, pillar or triangle point or whatever you want to say of how I introduced digital studies originally for this class. You remember we talked about digital methodology. We started with digital creativity, then we went to digital culture, and we kind of combined digital culture with the web literacy. Web literacy, I think, is an important aspect of digital cultural literacy, I guess. So now we're looking at the third thing, which is digital methodologies. Digital methodologies are instances where you're using digital tools like software or code to investigate a problem or answer a question or explain something complicated. And like the other modules, you're going to have a choice. You can choose different methodologies to explore, and I'll give you some to practice with and try out, but you'll have the choice of which one you want to really dig into. You'll develop a project around one of those methodologies, in other words, using one of these methodologies, and then with whatever you find or produce in your methodological work, you are going to share that in a hand-coded web page that you're going to produce on your website. So that's a lot. So let's get into some of that in some of the detail here. As always, I remain committed to helping you be successful with this. So when you get stuck, if you feel lost, if you have questions, please reach out and I will make sure to do that. You can even, of course, if you have questions even now as I'm working through it, make sure you speak up on the channel, live stream chat or Twitch channel. Go ahead and interrupt me if you think I've said something that didn't make sense. Then go ahead and jump on there and tell me, ask me your question. Okay, so here's our notes for today. This kind of works through some things to start on, and it's basically learn about the project that we're doing. So that's what I'm talking about right now. Choose a module and join the channel. So that's part one of that normal module procedure where you go through. Your first step is to decide which one you're going to do, and write a blog post saying why you've chosen that one. So try to get that done today if you can. And then I've got links to these. I'll introduce each of these options in turn here in a moment. And then, like I said, your end product in this case is going to be a hand-coded HTML page. So I would like for you to start learning some HTML. Now, HTML is something maybe you've already done a little bit with. It is very common, and it's also a pretty common like introduction to computing or computer programming kind of thing. It's a good starting point for writing code. And so you may have encountered it for that reason. That said, a lot of the kind of teaching programming to kids kind of things, that's something I've seen a lot because my kids are doing a lot of that. A lot of that is not HTML anymore. It's more procedural stuff now. I'm thinking of like Scratch and what's the other one? Starts with a K. I can't remember. There's a bunch of these things, and there's lots of great things. But those are usually doing. I guess those are actually closer to programming than HTML is. HTML is markup language, and so it's more about presentation. But we'll get into some of that in a bit. I just wanted to give you the roadmap for today, which is talking about digital methodology, introducing some of the modules, and then getting started with HTML. So let's take a look at these. Let me switch. I forgot to switch my screen over. Let me do that. Here we are. So I'm trying something slightly new with my screen layout. As you can see down here, I'm going to kind of give you the part I'm on, which I need to correct. So let me do that. Let me get to part one. There we are. So this is part one of this video for today, and we're going to talk about digital methodologies. And you can see I've got the notes here for today. So let me look at that. Right, so as I was just talking about, part one is choosing a module, and then part two of today is learning some HTML. So let's take a look at the modules. This is the DGST101.net modules page, which you've seen before, and this is all about the methodology category. So I'm going to switch over to that. And there's a lot. I'm going to give you 4 to choose from because actually there's only 4, so no, there's more than that. But I do want there to be some overlap in terms of which one you choose, so that you have at least one other person working on something similar, so you can help each other. But otherwise, my goal is to have you all working so that you're doing something that you're interested in. So there's this. I think all of these are pretty valuable, pretty important, pretty interesting kind of things. But I would like for you to, if possible, choose from networks, cultural analytics, text analysis, or digital journalism. Cultural analytics, by the way, is also called image visualization. This is the same module, but I'm rewriting it with a different name. So I'm starting to call it cultural analytics. I'll talk about that once I get into it. I'll just take these in order. Okay, so like the creativity and the culture modules, these are pretty open-ended. There's some kind of generic introduction text here, and then some things to do. This one actually has a pretty minimal, but some learning goals. So whatever you choose to do, your goal is going to be to understand how networks and relationships work, and then create and analyze a network visualization of something. I'm going to revise this because it doesn't have to be within a text. A network is, like as you can see here, all these like points connected to other points. And there are a number of tools that you can use to create a network that helps you understand a situation of some sort. I'll give you a couple examples. No, I should have pulled this up ahead of time because I'm trying to think of student's domain name where she posted these. Let's see if she's got it on her main page or on her digital studies page. I'll try this. Okay, so this is Cassie. She was, oh yeah, great. So this is it, I think. We're still broadcasting. Okay, so Cassie used a tool called Kumu, which is a way to make a map kind of node by node. And so Cassie she's on the rugby team, and I gather that, I mean, she explained it to me, but if you're on the rugby team, you have like a senior student who's like a mentor, and she had this like document that had all of the mentor-mentee relationships over the past several years, and she wanted to understand networks of like, did people with really good mentors become good mentors, and so on. I mean, really, she wasn't trying to make any arguments or implications. She was just kind of trying to understand who was mentoring whom. And she created this map. So each of these nodes here each of these dots is a person, and then the connection is the mother-daughter relationship in this case. Then there's also like sibling relationships, in the sense like whenever two people have the same mentor. So it gets like, you kind of have to know the situation to understand what you're looking at here, but it's a pretty good example of how you can use a network to try to understand this. Because she had this big massive spreadsheet. I looked at it, it didn't make sense to me, but it made sense to her. But now looking at it in this kind of hairball view, it starts to make more sense, and I kind of understand what she's talking about. And you can actually see sort of zones of influence, like this kind of axis right here. These are things that they help you understand a situation, or find things out about a situation or a set of relationships that you didn't think of otherwise. I'm not going to pull it up because it'll probably crash the stream, but there's also within the tools I showed you a couple weeks ago that I was using to collect tweets about COVID-19 and 5G and some other things that I was looking at, DC blackout. There is a tool built into that where you can load all those tweets into another kind of networked visualization, and you'll see who's retweeting who, and you'll see like clumps of like everybody's retweeting this one person, and then you'll see that, oh yeah, actually that one person is more influential in this particular network. So these are the kinds of things that network analysis can do. It's hard to get your head around sometimes unless you already kind of have a project that you think makes sense with this. Making like a social network is one way to do it, like thinking of like who you've been. Sometimes people will do like who they've been suite mates with or roommates with, and then like who their current roommates are, and then like who those people have been roommates with, and then who sort of you build a network of like who's been roommates with whom. And then in fact, students who do that find out that they actually have lots of connections, or like 1-degree connections to people that they didn't realize, and it can be kind of interesting to do. So so that's networks. If you choose this, there's several tools. The one I just showed you was Kumu. Kumu is great if you're doing it by hand. There's also something called Palladio and something called Gephi. They all have these interesting names, but these are a bit more automatic. So if you already have a bunch of data, if you clean it up the right way, then Palladio can do some things with it and give you a view of it pretty quickly. It takes some work to get it in there and take some practice. But like the other modules, my expectation is that you'll do a lot of this learning and figuring out on your own, but supporting each other within the group. So if one of you finds out that Palladio is great and you figured out how to do something really cool with it, share that in your Slack channel, and then that will, that would be helpful to everyone else in that channel. I believe I still need to make these channels, by the way. Maybe I should just do that while I'm on the stream here. So here's the networks. Okay, so I just made the network channel in Slack, so you can join that if that's what you're interested in doing. Let's take a look at some other modules. So the next one, what else did I recommend? Cultural analytics, or image visualization. This is, it's not a great title. That's why, I mean, images are already things you see, so it seems kind of redundant to talk about visualizing them, right? But the idea what we're talking about here is using this as a kind of zooming out, a kind of a distant viewing of a bunch of images all together, kind of macro analysis might be another word for these. So if this is something you're interested in doing, there's a way you can do this fairly quickly, I guess, with some tools, and I even went in and explained kind of like how to do this in some detail here. I need to make sure this actually still works, come to think of it. Depending on which Mac OS you have, this may or may not work. But these are some of the kinds of things you could do in a command line to create a visualization of a movie, for example. And that's the kind of thing a lot of people do with this. Let me show you some examples. So this is Kevin Ferguson is a researcher who does this, and he creates images like this one, which is, am I still streaming? Making sure, okay. So this image up here is a composite image of all of Sleeping Beauty. So this is what is called a Z projection. So it takes every single frame from that movie, or maybe 1 frame per second. I'm not sure how he set it up. And it stacks them like on a Z axis, like coming toward you, and it combines them. So it stacks them this way, then smushes them back this way into a single image, and you get something like this, which is pretty nice to look at just as an aesthetic object. Like, it's pretty cool. People who work on this and do this kind of thing will just often use these as like a desktop background or something because they look great. And so this is some other stuff. But that's the kind of thing that then also may lead to some insight. So if you take a bunch of movies by the same director and you make Z projections of them, would you find similar patterns with those? I had a student last semester who did this with Bob Ross paintings, and it became a way of looking at Bob Ross's composition style in a generalized kind of way. Like, you can look at each individual painting, but if you stack them all together, we could very quickly see he likes to put something light and triangle shaped in the middle, and then something kind of dark here, something dark here, and something kind of round down here. So it became kind of an abstracted view of all of his paintings together. It's pretty interesting. This is another kind of thing you can do. This is called a montage. Whenever you stack a bunch of images, taking, again, maybe 1 second from each, 1 frame from each second of a movie. When you present it like this, you can see the editing choices and kind of the rhythm of the piece, whatever it is. This is Frozen, and this is just 2,832 frames of it. But you can definitely see kind of the different acts of the movie, and different major scenes stand out. But you can see how like each major act is about the same length as the other, where each color makes each scene or event makes a similarly colored stripe in this view. So that's another compositional insight into how this was composed to begin with. And this is pretty detailed, and Kevin Ferguson actually describes his methodology here. Pretty interesting, and you can see the results. And if you want to do it, there is a tool called ImageJ. ImageJ is kind of wonky to work with, but I can show you how to do it. It's something that you can do. You can also try, this is a tool I made to make it even easier. This is called IMJ or IMJ, and you can do this in a web browser. Now this doesn't, like, you can't put an image, sorry, you can't take a movie, like a video file, and give it to this web page. But if you've done some work already to extract all the frames you want to work with, let's say you end up with 3,000 images from a movie, you can upload those all into this web page, and then it will generate some of these different visualizations. I'm not going to do one right now because it uses the same part of this computer that's broadcasting right now, so it probably would crash the stream if I tried it. But it does work pretty well, and most people find. It's limited in some ways because it uses the memory and processing on your computer. This isn't actually uploading to my website at all, but it loads in your memory, and sometimes that gets a little weird because sometimes some browser security issues can interfere with it. But it's pretty fun, I think, and you can produce pretty good things with it. So, that's something to try. In fact, I'll probably try to demonstrate it tomorrow. I just need to double check that. What is that? There's like a little period there by the J. I don't know what that is. Is that on my monitor? Can you see that? I don't know. Hopefully you can see this okay. I'm not sure what the resolution looks like for you all, but looks like you all are still watching, so I'm going to keep going. So visualization, yeah, I call it cultural analytics just because that's a more generic term for this kind of thing, but you can see some examples here, some pretty neat stuff. So now let's take a look at text analysis. So this is another important field of study. This is, and really actually, so far all these things I've described are things that I would, okay, thanks Becca, things that I would generally call under the field of digital humanities. So we use the term digital studies at UMW. A lot of other schools that have programs with very similar classes and content in them actually call what they do digital humanities. We decided on a slightly more general term for our program, but digital humanities means you're doing humanistic inquiry using digital stuff. And that's what all these methodology things are really focusing on. So text analysis is when you're trying to use a computer to help you read a book, to help you read a book or a whole bunch of books altogether, or something else that happens to be text. So let's take a look at just an example. Really, the best entry point to this is something called Voyant tools, and I've got a link to it here, and you can also look at it in this view. So this is, well, actually, I don't want to do this view, but this is the Voyant tools interface, and it comes preloaded with all of Jane Austen's work, but you can upload anything else into it. And it just takes a few seconds to process. And then once it's processed, it gives you all of these visualizations of it. There's 5 kind of window panes here, and you can actually swap these out. There's about a dozen more different things that you can put in these different windows. But you can go ahead and learn several things about this writer just by looking at it in this kind of abstracted view. So if you take a look at, for example, Mr. So Jane Austen is a writer that writes books with people and lots of people talking to each other, and so it's no surprise then that Mr., Mrs., and Miss are very common words that occur in her books. But there's kind of an interesting pattern. Mr. is more popular than Mrs. or Miss. I suppose that makes sense in the context of these books. In most of these books, there is a character who is Miss at the beginning and becomes Mrs. by the end, and so it kind of makes sense that Miss and Mrs. would be both in use somewhat equally, whereas all of the men are consistently going to be referred to as Mr. So even in books like Pride and Prejudice, where there are more women characters than men, they're still talking about Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bennet and Mr. Bingley a lot. So there's a lot of Misters that show up. So these are, is it Bingley? Bing something, whatever the other one is, the one who's not so great. But this is, again, not super surprising. Voyant tools, a lot of things like this, ultimately, the first thing they do usually is confirm something that you already knew about a text. Like I knew before looking at it this way that Jane Austen books have a lot of people talking to each other and a lot of people that are consistently identified as Mr. or Mrs. or Miss. And so this is not super surprising. But think as like the fifth most popular word in this particular view, that's pretty interesting, right? I mean, there are certainly characters in here who are introspective and who think about things a lot, but that isn't what I would have thought as a really prominent feature of these books. And yet maybe I should look at this again. Maybe this is an opportunity for me to look at these books and think about them again a bit more deeply and look for this theme. And maybe there is a theme of reflection or introspection that I had not noticed before. And so the computer here has given me a new thing to think about. And that's what text analysis is really, that's when it is at its best. So there's a few examples in here. Really, Voyant is the best place to start. You can get much more advanced with this. And basically each of these different windows and tools, you can get a lot more out of these approaches if you code it yourself, but you really don't need to, especially in the context of trying to finish something in a week. Like I did teach a whole class on this in the spring, but and those students did do a lot more detailed work. But still a lot of them ended up using Voyant as well, because Voyant is a pretty good starting point for these. It is kind of weird to work with, I'll say that. I mean, like if you look on, like you have to hover over each of these little windows, and then these things give you the options. So like this one that looks like an arrow, that's going to let you export this. Like if you want to embed that in a blog post. This one that looks like the Windows icon lets you swap out whatever is appearing in this particular one. So let's take a look at, I don't know, scatter plot. Let's see what that one is. Some of these I don't actually understand what they're doing, to be honest. Okay, so this is really hard to see. Okay, cool. So you can actually swap out different X and Y value, things to calculate for X and Y. Oh yeah, I never really played this one before. So let me see. I kind of want to try it. Actually, let me just make this. See, it's a little slow sometimes too. I'm going to. Oh, can you do? I'm gonna try this. This is a new thing they added recently. This thing they call a spiral notebook. But I think this will. I think this will let me work with this particular view by itself without having all the other stuff. Let's find out. Okay, yeah, but I can't make it bigger. I can code the parameters for it, but I can't make it any bigger. That's not super helpful. I guess I should look at it again. But this basically, oh yeah, cool. It is TF-IDF. So this is getting a bit into text analysis, but raw frequency means like how many times did this word occur, just count it. Relative frequencies is like compared to the length of the corpus it appears in, what rank is it basically? Like is this a very common word or a very uncommon word, and what is the percentage of its commonness or uncommonness, if that makes sense? And the TF-IDF means like within a set of documents, what is the uniqueness quality of a particular word within a particular document. So given all these, for example, in a TF-IDF, again, this is getting a bit into it, but if you were to look at all of Jane Austen's books, the word Darcy probably only shows up in Pride and Prejudice, and so that would have a very high TF-IDF score. So it would say a very high TF-IDF score associated with Pride and Prejudice, whereas Northanger would have a very high TF-IDF score associated with Northanger Abbey, right? So that it's a way to find out how one document within a set is different from the other documents. It's more interesting whenever you're looking at a set of books or documents that you don't know much about yet, and you're trying to learn about them. It's a little less interesting. The TF-IDF is a little less interesting whenever you're studying or applying this to a group of things you actually already know about. Okay, so let's move on. Digital journalism, and this is the final option, I guess. And I added this one at the last minute as an option. I originally was going to just say choose from these three, but I thought this one would be good to add because digital journalism is, using some of these tools, and there's a bunch of these listed in this module, and telling a story or reporting, like saying what's going on. And there's a lot going on right now. So I think this could be a really valuable, really interesting thing to do right now. So I don't know, for example, if you were at any of their protests or involved in any of their protesting going on, or you're planning on doing that some more. But that's what digital journalism can be. Like when I showed you, like the Blue and Gray Press, for example, on their Twitter feed, on their Instagram page, they've been posting videos and doing threads and stuff. That's digital journalism or convergence journalism. And so if this is something you'd like to try, then I think there could be a lot of really interesting stories to tell. Another thing going on right now, like in the spring semester, I had a couple students do the digital journalism kind of things for their methodology project, just really talking about how their life was changing, like how things were different now. And I think this is a really important moment, and documenting this moment, I think, is really a good thing to do. So digital journalism could be a way to do it. So there's a lot of tools you can do for this. Timeline.js is one that you looked at for the object lesson. There are lots of things like Timeline.js that you might find useful. Wakelet is a little different, and I think maybe I can show it to you if I can do it without logging in. I don't think I can do it without logging in. So I'm pretty sure this is free. That's the thing I was trying to remember. Okay, we'll go with Google. Sure, why not? When you do this, by the way, when you log in to something with something else, you should make sure to log out later and then delete it, because this is actually authorizing Wakelet. Okay, so I don't need that. Oh, loud. So what Wakelet lets you do is collect things from the web. So for digital journalism, so if you wanted to do something about Black Lives Matter protests in Fredericksburg, then you could add tweets to this. So you could actually search directly here in Wakelet And you can tell a story. Let's see if we can find a better one. Okay, these are all from a few days ago. Maybe, I mean, you should obviously change the, you can change this parameters if this isn't giving you what you want. Let's try. You can also just go to Twitter and then copy and paste these in here. Okay, so this is a good moment. And like, as you can see with tweets, they can have other things in them, and they can be, stuck together. So Twitter can be very confusing. Like if you just go to a Twitter search or even follow a thread. So the nice thing about Wakelet is like you can add your own text right here. Like you can just be like, I'm not going to be able to write anything coherent. But you could write an introductory, like a short paragraph here, even, and then kind of take it, maybe make it sections day by day or something like that. There's lots of things you can do to structure the narrative here, and that's what's really important, I think, in this moment. So yeah, let's see. Yeah, great. So there's a lot going on and a lot to kind of pull together and archive. So that might be a good project if you're interested in these things. Okay, so that was my introduction of all these modules. Again, you've got these 4, so you should go ahead and pick one. You're welcome to change your module, by the way, but the sooner you commit to one, the better you'll be able to do with it. So I'd recommend try to commit to one today, but hopefully that was a good enough introduction to those 4. I think they're all really interesting, so I personally would have a hard time choosing. I might go with digital journalism just because of how there's a lot going on right now, but you can also combine things too. Like for digital journalism, like let's say you got a whole bunch of tweets on that hashtag for Fredericksburg, you could run those all through Voyant tools, and then that might be interesting. So yeah, I don't know. Let me know if you have any questions about what you want to do with that. Okay, so HTML is the language of the web. It's the big thing that makes the web different from things that came before it, and it's the big thing about the web that made the web possible. So it's a very important language to know. It's not something that most people that are like web designers today spend a lot of time doing, actually. There's lots of frameworks and content management systems, all kinds of other things that people are doing, but it all kind of boils down to HTML, and you're looking at different things that create HTML. For example, whenever you write a blog post on WordPress, you're probably not typing HTML unless you've converted it that way, but after you type your text, WordPress takes that and then does some things with it and converts it to HTML to show it to you on a web page. Whenever you're looking at a web page, you're looking at HTML. Whenever you're looking at most apps, you're looking at HTML. That's just how things work. So I think it's important to know how that works and know how to manipulate it yourself. Sometimes you have to. Whenever I write like assignments and other things in Canvas, I think almost without fail, I have to tweak it somehow. And so whenever I'll show you what it looks like when I do it. Like if I'm writing this, yeah, I think almost every time I've written an assignment on Canvas, I can write with this kind of editor. This is like a WYSIWYG editor. What you see is what you get. But almost always I have to tweak it. And so I have to switch over here to HTML mode and make some changes. And I need to know HTML in order to be able to do that. I'm not writing this from scratch in HTML. I could, sometimes I do, but this is something that, because I know HTML, I can make these changes when I need to. It's a way of having some agency in this case, and that's what I want for you. I want you to have that same sense of ability to do something and make it better or fix it if it's broken or whatever you need to do. So HTML is a very forgiving language to learn. That's why it's a good starting one. In other words, if you are working on something in HTML and you do something wrong, it's unlikely to cause any problems beyond looking a little weird. So you're not going to accidentally delete anything on your computer. You're not going to accidentally write some code that causes like a cascading memory leak or something like that. You're not going to do that with HTML. So it's a good language to learn for that reason. Also, it's markup. So you're taking text and then you're adding something to it. And so you've already got some text, and that's also like a pretty solid place to start. Now, when I do this in the face-to-face class, there's really 3 or maybe 4. No, I'll go 3. I think it's basically 3 different ways that I help students learn this. First of all, spend time in class actually explaining it, demonstrating it, writing things on the board, showing you this is what it is. And then students spend some time working through lessons in Codecademy and W3 schools to try to learn it on their own. Sometimes in the opposite order of that, where sometimes they'll do Codecademy first and then I'll explain it. And then the third thing is that for a significant number of students, I'll just kind of sit next to them and kind of watch them go through it and help them figure out whenever they make a mistake, try to help get them back on track. So the first method of me explaining things I can do through these live streams, but this is limited. Like this kind of works well, but it kind of doesn't. So it's okay, it's kind of not. It's pretty hard for me, for example, to have you all do something and then follow along and then kind of check in step by step, which is what I would do in person. Like I'd say, okay, here's this, try this, and then I'd kind of figure out how everyone's doing, and then once everybody's good, then I'd say, okay, now let's try the next thing, and then see how everyone's doing. That back and forth doesn't really work on the screen, I've discovered. So I will give you a quick introduction now, in a moment, but this is going to be, I'm going to need to rely more heavily than I normally would on Codecademy and W3 schools for you all to learn as well. I do think Codecademy and W3 schools are good resources. They're different. They take a different approach. Each of them is a different approach to teaching the same content. So I like that because you might learn from one better than the other. A lot of people like Codecademy because it has a step-by-step trial and error kind of approach where it says try this and it won't let you proceed until you've successfully done this. I don't like that method actually, but some people really do like that, and that's fine if they do. W3 schools kind of trust you to decide if you're ready to move on or not, and I like that better. But still, it's hard to know if you're a total beginner. It's hard to know what you know. It's kind of hard to recognize if you know enough. And that's the same. That problem is true for whatever your learning methodology is. So I would like for you to try both of these. Let me give you a quick intro to HTML first, and then I will show you which parts of those to look at. So where's my? There it is. Okay. So this is my cPanel, and there are any number of ways you can write HTML, and I like to work with some like a code editor. I usually use Sublime Text, and then I have kind of an environment set up for writing code. You don't need to do that. Really, probably the easiest way to get to a place where you can write some HTML code is to actually directly using your file manager in Canvas. I mean in cPanel, which is your UMW domains thing. If you remember, I have a ton of stuff that you will not have. This is just because I've been building on this account forever. But this is it. I mean, this is what it is. Let me actually go through the process of creating a subdomain so I can just demo this for you in a safe place here. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a subdomain, and this will actually be similar to what you will be doing eventually when you're ready to share your project. There it is. So I'm going to make a subdomain. Digital. No, I'm going to call it. I like to use meaningful subdomains if you can. So let's say I wanted to do something like that. So this is, it's a subdomain I'm just going to create, and then it's blmfxbg.dgst101.net. So I'm not going to actually do anything with this, but this is just to kind of follow along with the idea I had. Let me refresh this view so that it shows up here, and there it is on the left. So now this is a brand new subdomain, so it's an empty folder, and I can just go ahead and double check here. You don't need to worry too much. You don't need to worry at all about this subdomain part of it. I just wanted to make sure it works before I proceed. Okay, there we go. This is an empty subdomain. This is the public version of this, which is just an empty directory. So let me make a new file here, and I'll show you what HTML looks like. And I'm not gonna, this isn't me teaching it. I'm just really just want to give you a quick taste of it. Like I'm not gonna be able to go step by step, but of course, try to follow along if you want to. Okay, so when you are looking at the file manager, you've got a couple options here. Do not use this option. This seems counterintuitive because you're trying to write HTML and you think this says HTML edit. That's not actually what we're doing, so please don't do that. This is what we want, actually just edit. We want to do this is a code editor, and that's what we need. So this is a web-based code editor. I like to download my own code editor, but this one works fine, and this lets us write code. The nice thing about a code editor, now this is different than a document editor like Google Docs or Microsoft Word. A code editor instead is going to understand syntax and highlight what you write according to the syntax of what you're trying to write. So let me make it a lot bigger so you can see this better. How big can I go here? Is that looking okay? All right, so yeah, so this actually, it already figured that I was writing HTML, but if you're writing some other language, you can choose that here. But you notice that when I typed HTML, it turned purple. It also completed the tag for me. In HTML, most of the time, a tag or an element is going to have two parts. It's going to have the opening part and the closing part. They have the same letters in them. Both have the angle brackets on the outside, but the last one, the ending one, has a / at the beginning. So this basic pattern here is true most of the time whenever you're writing HTML, whatever tag you're doing. So really, just once you kind of get used to that syntax and understand that, then it's just a matter of learning what tags do what, like which tags does what. But this is kind of the fundamental, the recurring syntax that you'll see over and over again. So you should just kind of ingrain this into your brain. This is how this works. Okay, so for an HTML document, a web page, there are some special tags that do special things that they have to be there. So the first one actually, forgot this one, doc type HTML. No, we don't need that. Sorry, is it that? Yeah, so that, I mean, if you forget that, it's not a big deal. Okay, so HTML opens and closes, and that's the pattern you see over and over again. It's opening and closing. There's an opening part and a closing part. Within your HTML document, it opens with HTML and it closes with HTML. So it says everything in between here is HTML. And so there's different things in there, but you should have one opening HTML and one closing HTML as the big parentheses that contain everything else in this document. So there are two other big parentheses you need to have. The first is head, and I don't know if you can tell, but it actually auto-completes this because this code editor knows I'm writing HTML and knows I want to complete that tag, so it went ahead and typed the second half of that for me. Some people find that confusing or frustrating, actually. Sometimes it annoys me too, but in this case, that is what I want, so I'm going to let it stay there. And then put a little space here, and then go down here and do the same thing and for body. So these are the two big ones. So there's HTML that contains everything, then there's head, and then there's body. Head and body are separate from each other, but next to each other, so they're like that. The head opens and closes, and then the body opens and closes. There's nothing between them, and they cannot overlap like this or be nested like different ways. So you have to make sure you keep that straight. But this structure is sometimes called the skeleton because it's just the bare bones. This is what you have to have before you start writing your document. You have to have the head section and the body section. Yeah, and there's a lot of things that can go in the head, a lot of things that can go in the body. I won't get into that because I'll let W3 Schools and Codecademy introduce you to those things. But I'll also go over some of these things some more on Tuesday. But this is the beginning of it. And Josh just asked a question, the difference between this and this. And yes, there is a big difference. Whenever you're writing, it tells you which part of the tag you're on, the opening or the closing. So if this part that I have highlighted here is the opening for head, this part that I have highlighted is the closing for head, and you can tell the difference because of the /. The / appears in the closing of a tag. So hopefully that answered your question, Josh. If not, I'll try to clarify. But yeah, you'll see that pattern here over and over again. So here's the opening HTML and the closing HTML, the opening head and then the closing head, and the opening body and the closing body. Now, I don't want to get too confusing, but some tags actually have the / built into them because they don't have a beginning and an end. So an HTML tag for an image looks like this, where it has some stuff in it and then it has its own /. So it's a self-closing tag. It opens and closes in one expression as opposed to other things which need the opening here and the closing here. So, but the / generally just means closing, if that helps you think about it. So, okay, great. So it looks like Josh replied with a check mark. So that's good. Oh, sorry, Ryan. I made the networking one, but I forgot to make the other ones. Let me make sure I get the name right. So journalism. Okay, so I just made journalism. And let me see, text in. I'm just making sure my name, that I named them the right thing to match the way that I named them on the website. And what else did I need? Hidden networks. Oh yeah, visualization. Just made visualization, journalism, networks, and text analysis. Okay, there you go. So hopefully that's it. So HTML, yes, indeed. So yeah, it's the kind of thing that feels weird at first, but you know it gets easier the more you do it, and it gets pretty. There is a logic to it, or almost an elegance to it. It's symmetricality, and I find it pretty comfortable to work with. I enjoy writing HTML. So this is it. So let me show you how and what W3 Schools and Codecademy are and how to start working with those. I'll start with W3 Schools, and you can see this from here, from the notes for today. So I'll skip down to this. For W3 Schools, start on work on this page. So you're learning HTML. This is I think they used to have one for HTML4, but this is the HTML5 tutorial in case there's a distinction. HTML5 has been standard for a little while now, so you shouldn't really have to worry about HTML4. A whole history of that actually is really interesting. I don't have time to explain it now, but HTML5 is the way to go now. It is slightly different from HTML4, but they are, web browsers are backward compatible, so they won't care. If you're using something from HTML1 or 2, you're probably going to have a problem, but most of the time the things that no longer work should not work. Like, you should not try to do those things anymore. So there's a reason they stopped working. Okay, so this is, as you see, this is actually, in fact, very similar to the skeleton I just created, but just with a little bit more. With HTML learning, in anything, it's really useful to try things out. So this is W3 Schools method. It really does, I don't know, it just sort of drops you in. This is actually introducing how it all works. But the way it works and the way that they want you to try things is using this try it yourself thing. And what you have here is basically a working space, so you can write things. This is my web page. And then you click the run button here, and then you see it on the right. And this basic workflow of having code on the left, visualization on the right, that's how I like to work as well, that sort of left-right syntax. I hope that makes sense to me. If you're doing this live on your website, you might want to have this view on the left and then this view on the right. There's nothing here, but that's the idea. Like, you might want to have those up in two separate tabs or two separate windows or something. But that's the basic idea here. With HTML learning on W3 Schools, the idea is you read some introduction or explanation, and then you try it out. And often the explanations are pretty short. It's just like, here's this thing, try it. I like to learn that way. So I enjoy this. There are quizzes, and so if you want to kind of make sure you know what you're learning, then try these out. And they are pretty good, I think. But there's no record of these. I think it lets you print out a certificate when you're done or something. But that's not very important to me. So if you want to do that, great. But if not, don't worry about it. But definitely try the quizzes, at least to just kind of test your knowledge. You will only be accountable to yourself, but I think that's still a good thing. So yeah, so I like this. Again, it's very structured, it's very top down, very just sort of, here's what this is, and it kind of goes through that bit by bit. Oh, it actually has the whole history of the different versions. That's great. The W3, by the way, the W3C is the organization that decides what HTML is, and then all the different user agents like Mozilla Firefox or Chrome or Internet Explorer, these all decide how to implement HTML or how to render it. And so they're pretty standard now, but they used to be really, really different. And so whenever we used to write web page code in the olden times, we would have to basically write one version of code. Like to make a single web page, we'd have to code it like 2 or 3 times to make sure it looked the same for every browser. So we would have it ready for an Internet Explorer user, and that was the one that was always a real issue. So yeah, thankfully, Internet Explorer is not as bad as it used to be, but it is still quirky. So you might get into issues with it. That's why I recommend Chrome or Firefox. One of many reasons. Okay, so that's W3 schools. Work your way through up to this one where you get into CSS. CSS is a lot. So CSS is its whole other thing. So, you know, you don't have to go down that road yet, but at least take a look at what CSS is. CSS is a separate language from HTML. It is built on top of HTML, but it has very different syntax and purposes. I would say focus on HTML first, and then once you get here, that might be a good place to pause, and then I can introduce you to CSS some more tomorrow. But let's take a look at W3. No, that was W3 schools. Let's take a look at Codecademy. So for Codecademy, they have what they call Learn HTML lesson, and I will probably have to log into this. They do a lot of courses here that you have to pay for, but this is a free one. Let's see. Let's log in with Google. Okay, yeah. So I think what they do with Codecademy, that like the content is free, but then like you have to pay for the quizzes. So I don't know why. But let's take a look. So introduction to HTML. So this is this the beginning? No, I'm already on 5 because I've already done this. I think because I've already started this before. Let me see if it'll let me rewind. Yeah, okay. So it lets you, I think I've already messed with it a bit. That's why we're seeing it there. But you can see a similar kind of introduction or explanation on the left. And then you'll see instructions here in this section. And then you have to try to do it here and then hit run. And if you do it right, you can see there's an error because this red dot appears. So let me add all the correct code here. So now the dot has gone away, and then I can say run and then double check it, and then move on to the next thing. Now this is giving me again the same HTML anatomy. I'm going to kind of blaze through this so that I can show you, get to the point where I actually will make an error. So instructions, add a body element to the web page, and then add this code here. So let's mess this up. So let me run that. Now this might actually let me through because I had it right to begin with. It did. Okay, let me just get to a point where I haven't done it yet. What I wanted to show you is the way that it keeps you from progressing. Oh yeah, okay, so I have not done this one yet. So you can see, or hopefully you can see, whenever I try to hover over the next button, it tells me I can't yet. So it says I need to actually read the instructions, and yes, this is unchecked. Now that you know how to structure HTML elements, we'll spend the rest of the lesson building an informational website using some of the most common HTML elements. We've put some elements in to get you started, but you'll write the rest of the page on your own. Below the H3 heading that says features, add an H2 heading that says habitat. Okay, so I'm going to add an H2 element that says habitat. I wonder if I misspell habitat, if it's going to complain about that. It is. Wow, okay, I've got to spell it right. Okay, so let's try that again. Below the habitat. Oh, I didn't keep reading. So this is one of the things you got to do with Codecademy. You got to keep reading. It gives you hints. Like it basically, like if you miss something, it gives you hints, and that's where like it's nice to have a hint. But I think sometimes because it gives you hints, sometimes students will over rely on the hints and they won't actually learn it. And then below habitat, that says countries with large brown bear populations. Okay. Did I do it? I did this. Countries with, okay. This is the back, see, this is the thing with Code Academy. I find myself sort of going back and forth with what is it actually asking me to do. Like, I know what headings are, so let me proceed, you know. So I guess these little instructions don't pop out until you're done with the next one. Okay, so finally on the next line, add an H2 that says media. Okay, great. Okay, now I can click next and then proceed. I've got a streak. Let's keep it going. Okay, so yeah, I don't know. Do what you can with this. And I would be interested in your thoughts on which of these works better for you. I mean, you can discuss this in just the general chat channel, I guess. If you find that one really works well and makes a lot of sense, then, you know, go ahead. In fact, for the rest of the week, I would say probably stick with just one or the other of these. But pick, you know, do them both for today, and then you'll have an informed opinion, basically. But I'll do some more of that introduction and explanation myself to kind of take you through it. Sometimes I have different ways of explaining it that might make more sense. Ultimately, you may still find it useful to have a one-on-one consultation or conversation about this. And if you go to my website, zachwhalen.net/contact, you can find a way to reserve some time to do that. And we can have a video chat session using Whereby. That's the software I use for that. And with that, you can share your screen so I can see what you're seeing, and I can show you, I can maybe see if you've made a mistake, or if you're lost, I can help you fix that mistake or get found again, perhaps, if I see your screen. And also I can share my screen if I need to show you something. So I just use the book now thing and book an appointment if you'd like to do that. Okay, so this has been going about an hour, so I should probably wrap it up. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you have any last minute questions, or if you want to get questions in on the last minute of the stream, this is that last minute. I'm wrapping it up. But basically, just to remind you, your homework or your work for today is pick a module and check out W3 Schools and Code Academy, and we'll move ahead with the rest of the week. I'll try to get the notes up for all 3 more days of this week by tonight, but running a little behind with that. So. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. If you do have questions, of course, I'll be online for a little while. Maybe I'll even see you during the COVID-19 in context class in a little while. Okay, thanks for watching. Have a good day. Bye.